Hi friends, welcome back to Codelligent. In this video, we will see how to control flow in Python. So first, we will set up our IDE. Till now, we were using the idle environment, but from this video onwards, we will move to the IDE. So we will see how to set it up. And then we will see the if, elif, else ladder. We will see some loops like while loop, for loop, and break and continue keywords. And then a special else with loops, which is not there in other languages, but it is available in Python. So we'll look at that. So let's get started. So as you would have seen in our previous video, we were coding using the idle environment. So that is good for practicing some basic checks, basic variables and string operations and all. But when you start full-fledged coding and you want to write multiple lines of code for achieving your logic, it's a good idea to use a IDE. And the most popular IDE which we use these days is Visual Studio Code. To get this, you can go to the code.visualstudio.com and you can just head to the download section where you can see the versions available for Windows, Linux as well as Mac. So based on your operating system, you can download the variant and you can install it. So once you install it and once you launch it, you will see the environment something like this. So first thing, we have to set up an extension of Python in our Visual Studio Code, which will make our coding much easier, because by default Visual Studio Code behaves like just a text editor, but based on the language which you are programming in, you get a lot of extensions which makes your coding much easier. So for that, you can see on the left hand side you have multiple options, out of which the last one is extensions. So you can head to that and you can just search here Python, and you will see there is one Python extension by Microsoft itself, and you can just install it. So it will take some time to install, so I'll just pause the video. So now it has got installed, and to verify you can just click on the extensions again and just remove this search. So you can see in the installed section you have some extensions and some dependent extensions which got automatically installed. So we installed Python, and Python debugger and pylance has been automatically installed because they are dependent. So now our IDE is ready for programming. Next, what we will do is, on your drive anywhere you can create one folder. So as I have created in F drive one folder called Python, so that we can keep all our files here. And first we will right click and just create a simple .py file. So maybe I can name it as sample, and I will change this to .py. You can do it from other places as well, you can do it from IDE also, but I just wanted to show how you create a project folder and open that in your IDE. So I have a folder called Python in which I have a file called sample.py which is currently empty. In Visual Studio Code, what I'll do is I'll go to file and say open folder. Instead of saying open file, you need to select open folder, and you just have to navigate to that particular folder. So I go to F drive, I go to Python and just say select folder. So now what happens is the IDE loads that particular folder and all the files which are there under that, and it loads this setting into the current environment, so that whenever you open some terminal for executing your commands, that also executes in that particular local folder. So let's close this tab and let's open this particular py file. So now currently this file is empty, and whatever code we need we will be writing in this and executing it here instead of executing in the idle environment. So first we will see how to use an if condition. So for example, if you have a variable called x which is maybe a value 32, and you have a variable called y and you have a value called 20. Now if you have a requirement where you want to check, like for example if x is greater than y, then you want to print maybe a string x is greater. So just save this, and to execute this you can execute it on command line outside this environment, but Visual Studio Code provides you a very good option called terminal, which is integrated here. You can just click on new terminal, and you will see a new window opens up here in the half, and by default it loads PowerShell for most of the times. If you are not comfortable with PowerShell, you can just click on here and you can go to a command prompt. So Mac users will get the option for terminal, that is the Mac terminal. So Windows user will have these two options. So anything like it's fine to execute in PowerShell or in command line. It depends which interface you are comfortable with. So for example, I'm using command line, and you can see by default it has loaded into that particular folder, that is F Python, because by default when you launch a command line you usually go to the C drive users folder, but here since you have loaded the IDE in locally in that folder, it detects the terminal also should be opened into that folder. So now to execute this file, you just have to give a command called python or py and just mention the file name, that is sample.py, and the moment you execute it, you can see the output is printed, x is greater. Now if I change this, if x is less than y, so now this condition is not met. Let's see what happens then. I execute this again. So now nothing has been printed. So what usually happens is, since the execution of the code happens always sequential, so first it initializes this x with a 32 value, initializes y with a 20 value, and then when it reaches here it will check an if condition. So if x is y, so in this case the condition is false, so it will not go inside it, it will just skip to the next line and nothing will be printed. So if it was x greater than y, then the condition would have been true and it will execute the inside line. So what if you want to check both the condition and print something in both scenarios? So for example, if x is greater than y, you want to print x is greater, else, so you have to make sure that the indentation is correct. So if I type else here and if I say print y is greater, so you can see the IDE itself gives an error saying that expected expression. So that means it is not able to detect else under this if. So that is happening because of the indentation. As we have discussed in our first video itself, the indentation is very important in Python. So to make this work, you need to keep this else at the level of if. So now this particular statement is for if and this particular statement is for else, and don't forget the colon. So now you have to make sure, like if you are starting if, your else also should be at the same level, and whatever is the other statement which should come under these conditions should be one tab or one space or two space, whatever you are comfortable with, and but you should maintain that indentation. So now in this case, when you execute, you can see x is greater than x is greater, and if I change this value to 40 and if I execute it again, so now you can see y is greater. Now what if x and y gets same? So you want to check that as well. So you want one more condition. So you can write multiple if else, or you can write if also. That's also possible. Like you can write if x is greater than y, just print. Again another scenario wherein if y is greater than x, you can print that. If x is equal to y, you can print that. So that is like individual ifs also you can write. Apart from that, you have an option to write else if. So now for example, you can say x is greater than y, then this is the case. Else, instead of else we will say elif. So remember, it is elif, not else if like many other programming languages. It's elif y is less than x, then this is the condition which needs to be executed. Else I can print both are equal. So in numbers, either this will be bigger or either this will be bigger, or it can be same. So these are the three scenarios which are possible. So I'm covering all the three possibles. So now if I execute this, it executes. Oh, there is a catch. I think I gave the condition wrong. So if x is greater than y, and y is less than x, I think these two are same condition, it's not different. So maybe I need to say if y is greater than x. So either in this case x is greater, in this case y is greater, and in this case both are equal. So now if I execute, it should be correct. So y is greater, and if I make this as bigger and I execute, so x is greater, and if I make them both same, and now if I execute, both are equal. So now all the three conditions are met. So this is how you check some conditions, and based on your condition you want to execute some statements. So this can be achieved through this, and you can have multiple else if ladder as well, or you can say nested if as well. So for example, if x is greater than y, you want to get inside this, but you want to again check some other condition. So maybe for example, if x is greater than 10, then you want special printing, like maybe for example print x is greater and more than 10, else you want to print x is greater but less than 10. So these are the two conditions under that. And on the outside if level, I will say print x is less, something like this. And let me remove this particular code. So now you can see it's a nested if. So first the execution will happen of this line, that is if x is greater than y. So if that is true, only then it will go inside, but inside again it finds one more if, and it will check if x is greater than 10. If that is true, then this will execute. If that is not true, then this will execute, and then it just comes out, because if has matched. If x is not matched, if this condition is not matched and x is not greater than y, then it will directly jump to else, and under else we don't have any condition, and it will just print this. So for example, if I just say x is maybe 50 and we execute this, so now you can see x is greater and more than 10. So if I say maybe it is 9, and I'll make this as 2, and I execute this, now x is greater but less than 10. So that's how an if else or if elif else works. Now we will see two different kind of loops. So now till now we have seen conditions, that is using if else kind of statements. But what if you want to execute some line multiple times based on some condition? So that is when you get loops, and there are two kinds of loop available in Python. One is while, one is for. So first we will see a while loop. So while loop, similar to any other languages, it is like when the condition is met, it will keep executing. So for example, I will say maybe x equal to 10, some variable, and I'll say while x is less than 20. I just want to execute print x, and also I want to increment x. So if you remember the first video, we have an incremental way of doing like this in Python, not the x plus plus. So you have to use either x equal to x plus 1 or the shorthand writing of x plus equal to 1. So now when I execute this, let's see what happens. Py sample.py. So now you can see it prints 10 till 19. So what happens is x is initialized with 10. First condition, it checks x is less than 20. Yes, it goes inside, prints the value of x, and it increments it to 11. Again it checks if 11 is less than 20, prints and increments. So it keeps going on. In the case of 19, it checks it is less, it prints and increases to 20. Now 20 is less than 20, which is wrong, and it just comes out of the loop. So that is how a while loop works. So based on what condition you write here, it just keeps on looping in this. So that's how a while loop works. Similar to this, we have for loop as well, but it works slightly different, since while loop works on a condition, whereas for loop works on a collection. So that is like if you have a collection of items and you want to loop through those items, that's when you have to use for loop. So since we have not got into the actual Python collections, we will work with some special stuff, like for example a string and a special method I'll introduce that is called range. So first let's see a string. So for example, if I say a variable str, which is nothing but Codelligent, and I want to loop through this string and extract every character and print them, how we do that? We have to write for some variable name. So maybe I'll just use s in what is the collection. So str is my collection. So this is how we write the for statement. And inside this, what I want to do, I want to print s. So I'll just clear this terminal and I'll just say py sample.py. Now you can see it extracted individual characters and just printed them on the screen. So it loops through this, it extracts c, prints, then it extracts o, prints, and it goes on till t, and after that this collection is over, so it just comes out of the loop. So that's how the for loop works. So now let's see how we can enhance this further by appending an underscore after every character. So for that we can use the print method, and if you remember in the first video we have used a special parameter called SEP for separating it. Apart from that, you have a special parameter called END. So usually whenever you have a print, it is ended with a new line character. So that means whenever we are printing of s, that means every character it is printing. So every time it prints a character, it just makes a new line entry. So that's why you see the Codelligent getting printed one after the other. The characters were printed every time in a new line, but you can override that. So by using END, if you mention just empty, that means like I don't want anything as an end statement, and if you execute this, it will just override the default behavior of print, and you can see it is printed as it is because it printed s, then o, d, e, and no new line character because it is empty, and it just prints in one line. So now instead of this, I can just mention underscore. So that means every print I want to end with an underscore instead of a new line, and when I execute this, you see every character is printed. After that underscore is printed. So that's how you can utilize this print method for some advanced type of printing. You can use based on your requirement, your logic, and you can do that. So this is how a for loop is used, and there is no restriction in inserting a condition inside the for loop or while loop. You can insert the if else conditions inside these loops as well. So to demonstrate that, maybe for example we can get back to our while loop condition wherein I am saying x is equal to 1 and I want to loop it using while x is less than 20. I want to print x. So if I do this and if I just execute this, you see, oh sorry, I just missed to increment that, otherwise it just keeps printing. And you can see this is kind of an infinite loop which has happened. So as a programmer you should be aware that there is something called infinite loop. So now if you see, the terminal has not come out, it is still printing. So since x is 1 and the value always remains 1, it just loops here till the memory gets over. So to stop this printing, you can just come to the terminal, press Ctrl C, it just comes out. And let me clear this off. Always make sure you have an exit condition in your loop. So in this particular loop you didn't have an exit condition, so you should make that exit condition. So now in this case x will increment and there is a condition at 20, the loop will be terminated. So now when we execute, you can see from 1 to 19 it has been printed. Now I want to insert a condition here. So that is like if x percentile 2 is equal to 0, then only I want to print this. So now what is this? So since in the first video we have seen percentage is the operator to check the remainder. So now when I say x divided by 2, if the remainder is 0, then only I should be printing it. So that means indirectly it is like it will happen only for the even numbers and all the odd numbers will be skipped. So now let's clear this, and if I say again py sample.py, and you can see from 1 to 19 only the even numbers have been printed and all the odd numbers have been skipped. So you can use if along with while, and you can use if along with for. If you want, you can use else as well. So for example, in case of else, I want to print maybe a dot, and if I execute this, you can see only the even numbers are printed, and for every odd I have printed a dot. So it's all depends what logic you want to write, and you can mix and match all these loops and conditions. So while working with for, I want to introduce you to one more special method called range. So if you use range, it is like an inbuilt method where it can generate a range of value based on what you want. So for example, I can say range of 1 to 20. So it is similar to producing a collection of number starting from 1 and ending 1 before 20. So that means this is the starting number and this number minus 1 will be the ending number. So to use this, we will have to use a for statement. So for maybe a variable x in range of 1 to 20, and I just want to print the x. So if I do this, you can see, just let's see what happens. I'll just expand this a little bit, and when I execute this, you can see it has printed from 1 to 19. So this range produces numbers from 1 to 20 minus 1, and you can modify this range by step. So there is one more parameter which it takes, which is called step. So if you can see the help here, range, start, stop, and an optional parameter called step. So now if I don't want to step, by default the step is 1. If I don't want to step by 1, I can just say 2. That means like I want to skip every time one number starting from 1, skip 1 and go to the next number. So let's see what happens in this case. It is like 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So it is just skipping 1. So this is step of 2. You can play around with this. If you put step of 3 and you execute, you can see 1 and then it skips 2 and goes to the third one. So like that. So this range also can be used for producing a collection of numbers, and you can use it like if you just want to generate even numbers. So in that case, you can just start from 2 and maybe you can give a step of 2. So now in this case, when you execute, you will get only the even number. So you don't even have to put any condition, and you can just produce a range of even numbers or odd numbers. So now while working with loops, there are two more special keywords which comes into picture. One is break and one is continue. You have a condition where once that condition is met, you just want to come out from that loop. So for example, I will modify this range to maybe 1 of 20, and I don't want any step. Let this be like this, and let me clear this, and when I execute, it is just a number 1 to 19. This is just a range. Now I want a condition here. For example, if my x is greater than 10, then I just want to come out of this loop. So I can write if x is greater than 10. So this is my condition. If this condition is met, just come out of this loop. So that is just break. So break will affect its immediate loop. Like that means if you have multiple loops nested inside, like for, inside that again for, inside that again for, the break will affect the immediate for. So here we have only for one for loop, and when we encounter a break, it just looks up and there is only this for, and it will just stop that for. So now when you execute this particular statement, now you can see it printed 1 to 10, and after that, once it went to once it checks if x is greater than 10, no, it is not, so it just continues the loop. The moment it goes to 11, it prints the 11 and it checks if 11 is greater than 10, it is true, then automatically it executes break and it just stops this for and it comes out of that. So that is how break works. So whenever you want to stop the loop, the break is used. Similar to break, we have one more keyword called continue. So break is used to stop the for loop, whereas continue works slightly different, wherein it doesn't stop the loop, it continues the loop, but it just skips that particular loop's execution. So what exactly it means, maybe I just modify this statement to little bit different so that we can see how it works. So I just bring this print x down so that we don't go till here. So before even printing, we check the condition and just come out of that. So in this case, when I execute, you'll see it prints 1 to 10 and just comes out of the loop. Instead of this, I want to print 1 to 10, but again from 11 to 15 I don't want to print, and after that I want to continue to print. So that means the for loop should end only at this, it should go full range, but in between I want to skip few things. So if x is greater than 10, and maybe I'll write one more condition, I can use and I'll say x is less than maybe 16. If this is the condition, if the number lies between 10 and 16, then I'll say continue. So that means the moment x value goes more than 10, this condition is satisfied, it just continues. It will not go beyond this execution, it will just go again back to the for. Again for 11 it goes back, for 12 it goes back, for 13 it goes back, till 15 it goes back, and the moment it comes 16, this condition is not met and it just goes to the print statement. So let's see how this executes. I'll just execute this. So now if you can see, 1 to 10 has been printed, 11 to 15 has been skipped, and the loop continued. So we have not stopped the loop goes ahead till the end, but based on some condition we just skipped the further statements in the loop and we just continued with the for loop. So that's how a continue works. So again, this depends on your requirement. Whenever you are writing a business logic, if you have a requirement that based on a condition you want to stop the whole loop itself, you don't want to proceed with the loop after that point, then you have to use break. But if your requirement is that the loop should go on till the end, and in between based on some condition you just want to skip the further execution of the lines in that loop, then you can go with the continue. So remember, continue will never stop the loop, it will always go ahead till the end of the loop. So now, as you have seen, there are loops like while and for, and people who are coming from some other languages, they also might be using for loop and while loop in other languages like C#, C++, or Java. But there is a special thing in Python, which is else with a loop. So whenever you are using for and you have the provision to use else here, and you can say print all is well. So now how this behaves, so let's just execute this. You can see 1 to 19 has been printed, in between based on this continue condition 11 to 15 has been skipped, and finally all is well has been printed. So why to use else? You might say like without else also, if I write the next statement as print, by default it should print all is well. But this else behaves in a different way. The else behaves in such a way that if the for loop or whatever loop, for loop or while loop, has executed successfully till the end, then only this will be printed. What does that mean? That means if I go back to my previous logic, that is if x is greater than 10 and I break this in between, that means the for has not gone till the end. Now let's see what happens. Now you can see the else side is also not printed. So that means this else with the loop will execute only if this loop has been successfully completed. If the loop was because of any reason terminated in between, then this else will never be printed. So there might be a lot of scenarios in real life where you want this, like you were doing some activity inside the for loop, maybe based on some database or something, and because of some reason it had to be terminated half, it couldn't go till the end. Then else part will never be used. If it was gone successfully till the end, then only the else part will be used. So based on that scenario, you can decide whether you want this else along with the for or not. And as I said before, we can mix and match these loops, and you can use nested loops inside, like how we have used nested ifs. To demonstrate that, I'll show you an example, like for x in range of maybe 1 to 3, maybe just a small range, and inside this I'll start another loop where is for y in range of 1 to 11. So that means I want to take from 1 to 10. It will skip the last one. So this is the range, and here I want to print x value then multiplied by, that is the multiplication symbol. I'm just writing x, or you can just write star also, and the y value, and after that I want to print equal to, and then I want to print the value of x into y. So let's see what happens in this case. So now when I say execute this project, now you can see a multiplication table. So what happens is, first the for loop starts with the first value, that is like 1. So now inside that it has another loop which is from 1 to 10. So in this case it prints 1 cross 1 and its value, so that is 1 cross 1 is equal to 1. Now this loop continues, so it goes to 2, it goes to 3, it goes to 4. So you can see for one value of x it goes all the way till 10, and once this loop ends, then it goes back to the parent loop and it goes increments it by one more, that is 2. So now for the 2, again inside this loop continues. So for 2, again it starts with 1 and goes on till 10. Once that is done, again it goes back to the parent loop, and since the range is over, it just comes out. So that's how a nested loop works, and you can do this with nested for, nested while, and instead of 2 you can have n number of loops, and depends what's your logic. And always remember to have an exit criteria. In range definitely there will be an exit criteria, but if you're not using a range, if you're using while, then you should have an exit criteria, otherwise you might end up in infinite loop. So I hope you understood all the concepts which we discussed today, and it helps you in controlling the flow in Python. You can use if else to control based on conditions, you can use while and for to loop through your statements, and you can use break, continue to play with your loops and exit that based on some conditions. So thank you.